3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
All right, welcome to Roots of Reality. I'm your host, Ben Baumann, and today I'm going to be talking about the history of political controversies. So throughout history, there have always been societies with controversial politicians. After all societies have people who just break the rules. Unfortunately, when politicians do this, though, there can often be bigger consequences. Because politicians, unlike your average citizen, are in positions of power since they are elected to roles which yield significant influence over the lives of many people, and therefore their decisions can impact us all. Thus, that is why we always have to be very careful about who we vote for in elections. Because as history has shown us, time and time again, corrupt politicians can be very dangerous for a democracy. So now just thinking about some examples of controversial politicians historically when it comes to the world's oldest existing democracy, the United States, there were people like former American Senator from Tennessee, William Blount, who in 1797 was forced out of Congress due to his treasonous plot to give the state of Florida and the state of Louisiana to the British Empire. And then later in the Civil War era in the United States, there were people like Indiana Senator Jesse Bright, who was known for his outspoken pro-slavery views and was later kicked out of the Senate because it was revealed that he was sympathetic to the rebellious Confederate States of America, who of course tried to break away from the United States in order to preserve slavery. And there are more and more examples throughout American history, as well as throughout the history of European democracies and democracies all over the world. After all, essentially all democracies have had corrupt politicians. For example, the recent president of South Korea, Park Geun-hye, was sentenced to prison for corruption. And this is not even mentioning the countries around the world that not only have mostly corrupt politicians, but go as far as cosplaying democracy every election cycle by putting on a show to their people as if their vote actually counts, when in reality it doesn't. This is why you have many dictatorships around the world that have pretend presidents that are really dictators in power for life, because they are not really democratically elected and their elections are fake. They just want to give the impression that they're a democracy because deep down, many people want to believe their nation is democracy. So with that, when thinking about modern politics today in the United States, there have been a lot of political controversies over the years. After all, 2 of the last 4 American presidents were impeached by one chamber of Congress. This includes Bill Clinton, who was impeached for lying under oath and hindering an investigation into his affair with an intern. And of course, Donald Trump, who tried to blackmail Ukraine to help him win the 2020 election in return for foreign aid, and was impeached a second time for later attempting a coup to overturn the 2020 election results and inspiring an attack on Congress. Unfortunately, though, Donald Trump wasn't alone in this because there were several politicians that supported this cause to overturn the 2020 election, including Republicans like Texas Senator Ted Cruz, Missouri Senator Josh Hawley, Representative from California Kevin McCarthy, who could soon become the Speaker of the House, and Representative from Georgia Marjorie Taylor Greene. And these are only a couple of 147 Republicans who supported this cause. To make matters worse, though, several people who reject the election results of the 2020 election are running again for office or running to be elected to office on November 8th. For example, people like Representative from Arizona David Schweikert, Representative from California Mike Garcia, Representative from New Mexico Yvette Harrell, as well as Senate candidates like Blake Masters from Arizona, Herschel Walker from Georgia, Adam Laxalt from Nevada, J.D. Vance from Ohio, and House candidates Sarah Palin from Alaska, Tyler Kistner of Minnesota, April Becker of Nevada, and Jim Bognet of Pennsylvania. Lastly, when it comes to Secretary of State elections across the country, a position that in many states puts the person elected Secretary of State literally in charge of the state's elections, there are also, unfortunately, several candidates who don't believe in democracy, including the Secretary of State candidates from the following states: Mark Fincham, who's running in Arizona, Christina Caramo, who is running in Michigan, Kim Crockett of Minnesota, Jim Marchant of Nevada, Audrey Trujillo of New Mexico. And just when you thought it couldn't quite get any worse, there are also several Republican congressional candidates and candidates for governor who have refused to say they would accept the election results of 2022 if they were to lose their election. This includes people running for governor like Carrie Lake of Nevada, Ron DeSantis of Florida, Derek Schmidt of Kansas, Tudor Dixon of Michigan, Doug Mastriano of Pennsylvania, Greg Abbott of Texas, Tim Mitchells of Wisconsin. And then for Congress, we have Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Marco Rubio of Florida, Ted Budd of North Carolina, Don Bolduc of New Hampshire. So to say the least, this is a pretty sad situation and represents probably the weakest point in American history when it comes to democracy. Because never before has there been so many democratically elected officials or people running for office who are openly against the democratic process of the nation. Therefore, at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if you're a Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Socialist, Independent, or whatever, because what does matter is if you care about democracy or not. And if you do, you probably shouldn't vote for someone who doesn't. This means vote for whoever you want, but just make sure your candidate doesn't support election myths. Because if they don't believe in the democratic process, that means they don't believe in your democratic freedoms. Because at the end of the day, they don't care about what you think unless you agree with them. So if you don't want controversial politicians that are hyper-partisan and that have zero interest in being part of our democracy, then I suggest you probably don't vote for them. It's as simple as that. The bar is quite low here, because if people that don't believe in democracy are put in charge of it, then ultimately, as a nation, we're just setting ourselves up for failure. If you think things have been bad or are bad right now, well, then you better get your popcorn ready, because if we've put people in positions of power across the country who don't believe in democracy, then as history has shown, nations that lose their democracies don't turn out well. And the future of American democracy is in your hands on November 8th. So hopefully, even if you're not interested in politics, you make your voice heard and vote, because you are literally living in history. And so if you want to help write it, I suggest you take part in it. And no matter what happens in this election or future elections, as a nation, Americans can overcome such a dilemma as the United States has before. After all, the United States survived a civil war, which was obviously way worse than what's happening today. But we still have to uphold basic democratic values. And though this episode today was mostly focused on the United States, this message really goes out to also anyone in democracy or anyone who hopes their nation will one day become a democracy. Do what you can to put people in positions of power that actually care about you and your family and your rights, and believe in the ideas of freedom. Because if they don't, then just like all these millions and millions and millions of people throughout history that have lived under kings and emperors or dictators, your life will be controlled and your freedom will be limited. So as always, remember, billions of years led to you.